The night over Varine Valley sank deep enough to rattle the bones. The sky hung black and hollow, moonless, heavy with the stench of burning diesel and the distant percussion of gunfire echoing through the ridges. 250 Marines from Echo Company were trapped, surrounded on every flank, their ammunition nearly gone, their radios stuttering with broken static. "Command, this is Echo 6. A voice crackled through the noise, desperate and raw. "We're surrounded. Requesting air support, anything you've got." But at Ravenfield Forward Air Command, the monitors glowed dark red, marked with flashing danger zones. The valley was blind. No communications, no satellites, no aerial view. Inside the command tent, the air was thick with unease. A major bent over the tactical map, his jaw locked tight. "If we send anyone in now," he muttered, voice low and clinical, "we'll lose more than we save." His words carried the cold certainty of arithmetic, not emotion. In the corner of that room stood a single silent pilot, Lieutenant Commander Aaron Locke, call sign Falcon. She didn't protest. She didn't ask permission. Her gaze stayed fixed on the glowing dots that represented 250 men fighting for breath, her gloved hand tightening around the helmet at her side. No one caught the expression in her eyes, the kind you only see in someone who's already decided. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so you never miss these stories of courage, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. The base buzzed with the low hum of generators, the sharp tang of jet fuel, and the steady rhythm of boots across concrete. Inside the operations tent, the flickering lights cast long shadows over exhausted faces bent toward a digital map pulsing red. Every pilot, every technician, every officer stared at it in silence. Those flashing signals over Varine Valley weren't just markers. They were people. Colonel Maddox stood at the front of the table, voice gravelly and hard. "Enemy anti-air batteries are active across the ridge. We've already lost 2 drones. No rescue flights until sunrise, that's final." A few younger pilots exchanged uneasy glances. No one liked standing down while Marines were cornered, but orders were orders. The colonel rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion bleeding through discipline. Near the back, Aaron Falcon Locke stood still, her helmet tucked under one arm, flight suit zipped high against the chill. She didn't speak. Her eyes followed the lines and arcs on the map. The red ridges marking enemy fire zones, the tight blue cluster marked Echo Company, 250 lives blinking in the dark. She could almost hear their breath in the silence. Captain Holt leaned back in his chair with that trademark smirk. "No offense, Falcon," he drawled. "You're solid on supply runs, but this isn't grocery delivery." A ripple of laughter circled the room. One of the ground crew chuckled. Another looked down to hide a grin. Aaron didn't react. Holt spun a pen between his fingers, enjoying the moment. "You've been running maintenance hops for what? 2 years now?" Captain Holt smirked, spinning his pen lazily between his fingers. "Let the real gunship pilots handle this one." Colonel Maddox shot him a sharp look. "That's enough, Captain." But the damage was done. The laughter lingered, quiet and cruel. Aaron Locke lowered her eyes to her gloved hand, thumb tracing the faint outline of a tattoo on her wrist. A pair of wings and 3 worn initials, RN for Ryan Nash, her former co-pilot, the one she'd lost over Kavira back in 2017. The memory was the reason she'd been grounded, the reason she traded combat for supply runs. She'd never spoken about it, and she wasn't about to start now. Across the table, a young radar tech leaned toward his partner, whispering just loud enough to sting. "Why's she even here? She hasn't flown combat since Kavira." She heard it. They all did. The words hung in the air, small and sharp, cutting through the hum of electronics. Colonel Maddox cleared his throat. "All right, listen up. Enemy batteries have confirmed surface-to-air range. I'm not risking another bird. No launch orders until sunrise." A few officers exhaled in relief. Someone cracked a nervous joke. Chairs scraped the floor. The briefing was over. Erin didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the blue cluster of lights pulsing on the screen, each one a Marine in the dark, waiting for help that might never come. "Lieutenant Commander," Maddox said, turning toward her, "you're on midnight maintenance watch, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Keep the flight line sealed. We don't need any heroes tonight." She nodded. "Understood, sir." Holt brushed past her on his way out, muttering under his breath, "Stick to cargo, Falcon. You're safer there." She waited until the tent emptied, until the voices faded into the hum of distant artillery. Outside, the air was cold and dry. A sandstorm had swept through earlier, leaving fine grit over everything. She stepped onto the dim flight line, boots crunching against concrete. Rows of gunships slept beneath their tarps like iron beasts, their hulls still radiating the heat of the day. She ran her hand along the nose of her Falcon 11, the same aircraft she'd flown the night Ryan Nash went down. Same patch on the fuselage, same dent in the tail she refused to repair. "Grocery delivery," she murmured bitterly, shaking her head. Her gaze lifted toward the northern horizon. The faint orange glow out there wasn't dawn, it was fire. Somewhere in Varine Valley, Echo Company was still holding the line. Through the control tower's glass, she could see silhouettes moving. Officers scanning static feeds, others pouring coffee, convincing themselves nothing more could be done. Erin Locke stood alone beside her bird, narrowing her eyes against the desert wind. The echoes of laughter still clung to the air, but beneath them was something deeper. A quiet, familiar voice she hadn't silenced since Kavira. The one that whispered when orders failed. She rested her palm against the tattoo on her wrist and spoke softly to the night. "Not this time." Then she turned toward the hangar bay, her boots striking the ground in an even rhythm, every step deliberate, every breath steady. The base lights flickered once as the generators surged. Somewhere inside, warning alarms blinked. Nothing serious, just another power surge. But out in Varine Valley, time was running out. And Lieutenant Commander Erin Locke, the so-called supply pilot, was about to remind every soul at Ravenfield Command what it truly meant to fly into the fire. The command tent reeked of burnt coffee and stale air. Maps spread edge to edge on the briefing table, while red and blue lights blinked like heartbeats across dusty screens. The whir of printers, distant engines, and occasional static pops filled the hush. No one dared break. Lieutenant Commander Erin Falcon Locke stood near the back. Helmet tucked under one arm, gloves on. She'd been there almost an hour, not because anyone had told her to wait, but because she couldn't bring herself to leave. Colonel Maddox sat at the head of the table, voice steady but heavy. "No flights in or out until dawn," he repeated, each syllable slower as if to let it sink in. "I know what's out there. I know who's out there. We've lost 2 aircraft already, and I'm not losing a third. That's final." No one answered. The room hummed with resigned silence, as a few officers shifted in their seats and the generators seemed louder for it. Erin stepped forward. "Sir," she said softly, "they'll be dead by then." Heads turned. Maddox didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That's an order, Lieutenant Commander." They stood in a quiet exchange of history. Maddox had known her from training cycles, from after-action reviews, from long nights at the hangar when neither could walk away from the noise of war, and though respect lived between them, tonight it lay buried beneath fear and duty. He saw something in her face that tightened his jaw. "Locke," he said low, "I know what you're thinking. Don't." She didn't answer. Silence stretched, broken only by a radar tech's tapping. The red cluster on the screen pulsed. Echo Company. 250 Marines surrounded in the northern valley. She watched those blinking lights like faces. Men she'd never met, voices she'd never heard. But she could imagine their fear, their exhaustion, the helpless waiting. That same silence had come before. The night RN, Ryan Nash, went down over Kavira. Radio static, unanswered calls, the rescue that never arrived. "Not again," she whispered under her breath. "Not again." She turned toward the exit. Maddox snapped to his feet. "Where are you going?" "To check my bird," she replied evenly. "You ordered the line sealed." He narrowed his eyes. He knew she was lying, but he also knew there was nothing he could say that would stop her now. "Don't make me write your name up," he said softer. She paused at the door, radar light painting her flight suit red. "Then don't, sir," she answered, and walked out. The desert air hit like a wall, dry, sharp, endless, carrying the faint sting of oil and heat. Floodlights swept the tarmac where rows of aircraft slumbered. She moved past Hawks and Hornets, metal skins glinting under the lights. A few mechanics still worked, patching bullet holes and checking fuel lines. They nodded as she passed. Sergeant Riker stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, "we're grounded till sunrise, straight from the colonel." She stopped beside her Falcon 11, hand resting on the scarred side panel where paint was chipped from years of service. She'd flown this bird through storms, sand, and hell. "Fuel her," she said quietly. "Ma'am, fuel her and arm her?" Riker asked. "Full payload," she cut in, looking him dead in the eye. He hesitated, swallowed, then nodded. "Aye, ma'am." She climbed onto the wing and slipped into the cockpit with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime there. The seat creaked beneath her as the familiar scent of oil and dust folded around her like an old ghost. Her hands moved without thought. Switches, gauges, power checks, each motion smooth, practiced, automatic, as if she'd never left a combat behind. For a long moment, Aaron Locke sat staring into the emptiness beyond the glass, the horizon stretching black and endless. In her headset, the faint chatter from command buzzed like distant static. They were still arguing, still weighing lives against risk, still hesitating. Her fingers brushed the photo taped to the dash. Two pilots grinning beside their gunship, their smiles confident and young. The man beside her had an arm slung around her shoulder, the name patch reading LT, Ryan Nash, RN. He'd died in her arms over Kavira, the sky burning, the radio dead. She had sworn that night she'd never let it happen again. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You'd hate this, Ryan. All talk, no action." She flipped the master switch. The cockpit came alive with a soft green glow, and the first rotor began to turn, slicing the desert air in slow, deliberate rhythm. Inside the tower, a voice barked, "Lock spinning up." Another followed, sharper. "Get her on comms now." She ignored them. Her breathing slowed as the engine's hum steadied her pulse. "Tower control, this is Falcon 1 requesting clearance," she said evenly. Silence, then. "Denied. Repeat. Falcon 1 denied. You are not cleared for takeoff." Aaron keyed the mic again. "Copy that," she said, pausing for a beat, "but I'm not asking." The second rotor kicked in, dust swirling into a storm across the pad. Crewmen scrambled for cover. Sergeant Riker sprinted forward, waving his arms. "Ma'am, orders are to stand down." She met his eyes through the glass and gave a calm, almost reassuring nod. Then her voice came over the intercom, quiet but unshakable. "Tell the colonel I'll be back before sunrise." The Falcon 11 lifted, tearing sand through the night, the roar rolling across the base like thunder. Inside the command tent, Colonel Maddox froze, headset pressed tight to his ear. "Locke," he said slowly, "you shut that bird down right now. That's a direct order." Her reply crackled through the static, faint and steady. "Understood, sir, but if I don't make it back," a brief pause, "send flowers to the memorial wall." The line went dead. Outside, the gunship banked east, vanishing into the dark. Maddox slammed his fist on the table. God help her. No one spoke. Over the black expanse of Varine Valley, the night opened wide as the lone silhouette of Falcon 11 disappeared into the storm, chasing the echo of gunfire. She was breaking every rule, defying every command, gambling her life, her career, her name. But in her mind, she still saw those blue dots blinking on the map, heard the fear in the Marines' voices, felt the weight of the man she hadn't been able to save. And as she flew into enemy airspace guided only by instinct and faith, Aaron Falcon Locke whispered the same words that had haunted her since Kavira. Not again. The radio crackled, unanswered. The engines roared louder, cutting through the desert silence, and for the first time in years she felt alive. Sergeant Riker jogged toward her, headset askew. "Ma'am, you can't take her up. Clearance denied. Colonel's orders." Aaron Locke didn't slow. "Then don't log it," she said flatly. Riker froze. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she answered. "If there's no record, there's nothing to deny." She climbed the ladder, boots ringing on the metal rungs. The engine sat still, heavy with promise. Sliding into the seat, she strapped in and began her checks, hands moving like they'd been waiting years to remember what courage felt like. Riker stood below, stunned. "Ma'am, you'll be court-martialed." She looked down through the canopy, eyes calm. "Then make sure the report's spelled right." The first rotor whirred to life, a low hum swelling into a storm as dust spun across the tarmac. Mechanics ducked, shielding their faces while lights blinked to life and the cockpit glowed green. Inside the command tent, alarms flickered and radios erupted. "Locke, shut it down. That's a direct order." Maddox barked, his voice sharp in her headset. She pressed the switch, voice steady. "Copy that, sir, but if I'm not back in 30 minutes... She paused, almost whispering. "Send flowers." She released the mic and pushed the throttle forward. The rotors roared, the dust became a storm, the air itself shimmered. Riker stepped back, hand over his face. "Godspeed, ma'am," he shouted over the wind. She nodded once, eyes forward. The runway stretched ahead, a thin gray ribbon into the dark. Falcon 11 lifted, hovered for a heartbeat, then surged upward through the haze. The dust swallowed her whole, the sound fading into a low, defiant thunder rolling east. Back in the tower, a radar tech whispered, "She's really doing it." No one moved. They just stared at the empty sky, knowing they'd watched a woman break every rule the service had. Not for rank, not for glory, but for 250 Marines still waiting for a miracle. Varine Valley burned alive below. Fire stitched the sky, tracer rounds carving red scars through the dark. Smoke poured off the ridges, thick and black, reeking of oil and iron. Down below, the last of Echo Company clung to life. Rifles glowing hot, dirt and blood blending into the same color. Flares tore upward, red for the wounded, green for the perimeter, each bursting like a desperate heartbeat. From the north came a rumble, soft at first, then rising to a roar. Marines looked up through the smoke. A silhouette cut through the haze, twin rotors slicing dust, searchlights burning white across the night. "Who the hell is that?" a sergeant shouted, hand over his eyes. The lieutenant beside him stared, disbelief washing over his face. "That's Falcon," he said quietly. "She came for us." Falcon 11 dove fast, ripping through enemy flak like a blade. Orange and white tracers streaked past as Erin Locke gritted her teeth and held the stick firm. The aircraft bucked and shuddered, but her hands were steady. The radio hissed with chaos. "Echo 6, this is Falcon," she said, voice calm. "I've got visual. Pop smoke for extraction." A reply crackled back through the static. "Falcon, you can't land here. Zone's hot." "Yeah," she said, narrowing her eyes. "I noticed." Then she pushed the nose down. The ground rushed up fast, too fast, but she didn't flinch. Machine gun fire tore across the valley floor as Erin Falcon Locke drove straight into the storm. She swung. Falcon 11. Sideways, the side cannon roaring as a burst ripped through the enemy ridge. Dirt and flame erupted like thunder. "Get ready!" she shouted. The landing gear slammed into the ground, bounced once, then dug into the rocky earth. Rotor wash hurled debris across the valley as Marines sprinted toward the landing zone. "Wounded first," Erin Locke yelled, her voice shredded by the engine's roar. Gunfire clattered against the armor. Sparks flared across the canopy while alarms screamed. Tail hit, hydraulics flashing red. Come on," she muttered, wrestling the stick. Outside, Marines dragged their injured through smoke and dust, throwing them onto the open ramp. At the rear, the crew chief waved them forward, shouting names drowned in the chaos. "Move it! Move!" Enemy rounds struck the tail again. Another siren wailed. "Tail's compromised," the chief yelled. Erin gritted her teeth. "Hold that door. Nobody stays behind." The gunship trembled under impact. A side panel blew apart in a burst of sparks, flames licking the rear vent. She fought the controls, eyes locked on her instruments. A Marine clambered aboard, carrying another over his shoulder, blood streaking his sleeve. He fired one last burst into the dark before diving in. "We're full," the crew chief called. "That's everyone." "Negative," Erin snapped. 3 heat signatures still by the ridge." She yanked the collective, lifting the gunship into a low hover amid smoke and chaos. The searchlight pierced the haze. There they were, 3 Marines pinned behind a rock as tracer fire closed in. She pivoted the bird sideways, unleashing another suppression burst that shook the valley. "Move," she shouted into the mic. 15 seconds. The trio sprinted through fire and dust, leaping into the ramp as it began to close. The last man's boot cleared the edge just as she slammed the throttle forward. Falcon 11 surged upward, engines screaming. Flames crawled across the tail, warning lights painting the cockpit red. "Falcon, you're hit bad," a voice barked over comms. "You'll never make altitude." Erin's hands never wavered. "Watch me." The aircraft shuddered violently. Every vibration slammed through her seat. The acrid smell of burning metal filled the cockpit. Her co-pilot's voice crackled through static. "Tail rotors failing." "Then we'll fly crooked," she said, eyes locked ahead. Below, the valley disappeared beneath black smoke. Above, cold stars shimmered, distant but steady. In the hold, wounded Marines clung to straps and rails. One, pale and shaking, looked toward the cockpit and whispered, "She's actually doing it." Her voice came over the intercom, calm, steady, resolute. "Everyone hold tight. We're not home yet." The burning tail glowed like a comet behind her as Ayla, Falcon 11, climbed beyond the reach of enemy fire. Back at the base, a radar tech whispered, "Falcons, clear of the valley." In the cockpit, alarms still wailed. Aaron adjusted the throttle, breath measured, eyes unblinking. The desert stretched endless beneath her, but she could already see raven fields. Runway lights in her mind. She glanced at the tattoo on her wrist. Small wings, the faded initials. Dan, and smiled faintly through the smoke. "For you, Ryan," she whispered. "And for them." She pushed the throttles forward. Engines howled in protest, every warning light blazing red, but she kept flying. As the last Marines scrambled aboard, faces streaked with ash and disbelief, the crew chief slammed the hatch shut. The ground erupted behind them. "Hang on," Aaron yelled, pulling hard on the stick. The bird lifted just as an RPG sliced through the night, a streak of lightning from the ridge. "Incoming," someone shouted. She flared the tail, jerking the craft sideways. The missile screamed past, detonating against the armor with a deafening blast. The whole aircraft buckled, flames washing across the right wing. Falcon 11 dropped, bouncing hard off the dirt. Sparks cascaded across the dash, alarm shrieking. "Engine 2's out," the co-pilot shouted, blood dripping from a gash on his brow. "Hydraulics failing." Aaron's arms trembled as she fought the controls. "Then we'll fly on one." He stared at her. "You're hit, ma'am. Your shoulder." She didn't look down. The left side of her suit was soaked in blood, fabric torn by shrapnel. "So are they," she said evenly. "We're not done yet." The co-pilot's hands slipped over the gauges. "We can't hold altitude." Her voice dropped, steady and low. "We don't need altitude, we just need home." The rotors clawed at the air, blades slicing through smoke and dust as if fighting gravity itself. Each vibration rattled through. Aaron locks. Bones. The right engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back weakly, while the remaining system strained to compensate. Outside, the world burned. Tracer rounds tearing across the dark sky, the valley below glowing like the mouth of hell. She steadied her breathing, eyes locked on the faint line of the horizon. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the aircraft, voice low and steady. "You've got one more flight in you." Falcon 11 trembled, climbing unevenly. "We're flying sideways," her co-pilot shouted, gritting his teeth. "Doesn't matter," she said, jaw tight. "We're flying." Behind them, Marines clung to straps and rails, bracing against every jolt. The wounded lay across the deck, faces pale, uniforms soaked in blood, the floor slick with dust and fuel. One of them stared toward the cockpit, lips moving in prayer. In the reflection, Aaron caught their faces. The very men she'd come for. Not dots on a screen this time, but breathing souls, alive. A burst of static cracked in her headset. "Falcon, do you copy? This is base command. Respond." She pressed the comm switch with her thumb, voice soft but sure. "All souls aboard," she said quietly, "coming home." The line fell silent. Then a voice came back, quiet, reverent. "God bless you, Falcon." The engines coughed again, nose dipping hard. Aaron yanked the cyclic back, every muscle screaming as the gunship groaned, rotors clawing for air. Her vision blurred. Pain pulsed down her injured arm. "You need a med kit," her co-pilot gasped, reaching toward her. "Stay on the gauges," she snapped, coughing as smoke poured through a crack in the canopy. Her eyes watered, but she never looked away from the night ahead. The desert stretched for miles, black, endless, silent, lit only by the fires below and the soft glow of dying instruments. She thought of Kavira, the crash, the blaze in the sky, and Ryan Nash's voice fading into static. She'd lived with that silence for years. Not tonight. She flipped the overhead switch, the emergency beacon pulsing red, its rhythm matching her heartbeat. "You're out of fuel in 10 minutes, the co-pilot warned, breathing hard. "Then we make it in 9, she said. They skimmed low across the dunes, the aircraft limping but alive. Alarms kept flaring, hydraulics, overheat, system failures, but she ignored them all. From the ground, Falcon. 11. Must have looked like a dying comet, trailing smoke and fire, one engine sputtering, the other aflame. But it kept moving, stubborn and defiant, just like the woman flying it. Minutes dragged like hours. Then, through the haze, the faint outline of Raven Field shimmered. A band of runway lights glimmering like a promise. "I see it," her co-pilot breathed. "We're close." Aaron's lips curved faintly, pale and trembling. "Told you." Her headset crackled again. "Falcon, your transponder's erratic. Do you need escort?" She glanced at her console, every gauge buried in red, every system screaming to shut down. "Negative," she said. "Just open the gate." They crossed the outer perimeter, alarms blaring through the control tower. Floodlights swung upward, flooding the sky white. The gunship jolted once, then again, the right rotor coughing its last breath. She fought it down, hands shaking, easing the throttle inch by inch. "Easy," the co-pilot murmured. "Easy." The skids slammed into the pad, the aircraft lurching before grinding to a stop. Flames climbed to the tail, smoke curling into the dawn. Fire crews sprinted forward, shouting orders, hoses spraying foam. Aaron Locke sat still for a moment, the world slowly coming back, the beeping of fading systems, the cries of Marines being pulled from the hold, the rush of boots across concrete. Her co-pilot unbuckled, voice barely audible. "You did it?" She blinked, then smiled faintly. "No," she whispered. "They did." She reached up and flipped the master switch. The engines coughed once, then went still. The rotors slowed, the final gust of air whispering across the pad. Outside, one of the wounded Marines, barely standing, turned back toward the cockpit. He lifted 2 fingers to his temple in a shaky salute. Aaron Locke met his eyes and nodded, too exhausted to speak. As smoke rose into the first light of morning, she whispered into her headset one last time, voice barely more than breath. "All souls aboard," she said again. "Coming home." Then she closed her eyes as the desert sun broke over the horizon, and Falcon 11 rested silent, battered, burning, but finally home. Falcon 11 rested in silence, battered, burning, but home. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert as the gunship limped over the last ridge. One engine coughed weakly, trailing smoke like a wounded bird dragging its wing. The sound was uneven, half roar, half groan, but it was the sound of life. Down on the tarmac, the crews were already gathered, eyes turned toward the sky. No one spoke. Her signal had flickered for 20 minutes, vanished twice. Most had assumed she was gone. Then came the low rumble, deep, familiar, defiant. Falcon 11 broke through the haze, wobbling as she descended. Her landing gear groaned beneath the weight, and as the skids touched down, one rotor snapped with a sharp metallic crack, scattering sparks across the runway. The bird settled hard, shuddered once, then went still. Smoke drifted upward, curling in the dawn light. For a few long seconds there was silence. Then the rear hatch creaked open. One by one, the Marines emerged, bloodied, limping, but alive. Medics rushed in, counting heads, checking pulses, easing the wounded onto stretchers. Some men refused to lie down until they saw their brothers clear the ramp. At the edge of the crowd, Colonel Maddox stood motionless, cap in hand, his officers behind him pale and speechless. Captain Holt was there too, the smirk from last night gone, replaced by something he couldn't name. Then they saw her. Erin Locke stepped down from the cockpit, slow and steady, boots striking the ground with the weight of exhaustion. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, one side of her flight suit dark with blood, shoulder bound by a strip of torn gauze. The wind caught her hair, blowing it across her face as the last rotor spun lazily behind her. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like someone who'd given everything. And then a little more. The medics started toward her, but she lifted a trembling hand. "Take care of them first," she said softly, her voice hoarse and low, born from smoke and strain. A young Marine, barely 20, stopped in front of her, hands shaking. His lips quivered as he tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, he gave a single nod and whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Erin returned the gesture, tired but firm. "You did your part," she said. "That's all that matters." The air was thick with jet fuel and sand. The final rotor slowed to a halt, creaking into silence. Colonel Maddox began walking toward her, each step slow, deliberate. The staff followed at a distance, unsure whether to speak or salute. She stood her ground, spine straight, eyes unwavering, though her hands trembled faintly at her sides. Maddox stopped a few feet away, the dawn light carving deep lines into his weathered face, the face of a man who'd spent the night living with a decision he couldn't undo. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he removed his cap. All sound on the tarmac seemed to fall away, the shouts, the engines, the rustle of stretchers, until only the desert wind whispered across the metal. The colonel straightened, locked eyes with her, and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. Erin didn't move at first, disbelief flickering behind her tired eyes. Then she returned it, crisp, steady, though her arm trembled halfway up. The same men who had laughed at her the night before now stood in stunned silence. No one dared speak. Some swallowed hard, others lowered their heads. Captain Holt, the man who'd mocked her as a supply runner, stepped back and removed his cap. For once his face held no trace of arrogance. Maddox lowered his hand. "You disobeyed every order I gave," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," she replied, voice even. He paused, then nodded once. "And you brought them all home." Her lips curved faintly. "That was the job, sir." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Turning toward the crowd, Maddox barked, "Get those Marines to the infirmary, and someone make sure Riker gets patched up." The desert wind rolled past them, carrying the smell of smoke, jet fuel, and something else. Relief. His voice cracked on the last word. As Colonel Maddox passed her, he stopped just for a moment. "Lieutenant Commander," he said under his breath, his tone stripped of rank and authority, "you remind this old soldier what courage still looks like." Erin Locke didn't respond. She just turned her eyes toward a Falcon 11. Her ship, scarred, smoking, but still standing. The first rays of sunlight stretched over the dunes, washing the desert in gold. The rotor blades slowed to a stop, their reflections flickering faintly in her tired eyes. She drew in a long, trembling breath, one heavy with pain, relief, and something that felt like peace. All around her, the base roared back to life, medics shouting orders, stretchers rolling past, engines coughing awake. But for her, time had gone still. She brushed her fingertips along the edge of her tattoo, the faded wings, the initials. R. still visible beneath grime and blood, and whispered softly, "We're home, Ryan." Then she turned toward the wounded being loaded into the trucks, walking beside them in silence. The pilot, who had defied every order, risked everything, and brought her people home, didn't need applause. No music, no headlines, just the dry wind moving through the valley and the quiet that follows when heroes finally return. Medics moved quickly, voices blending with the low rumble of engines across the flight line. The air hung thick with dust and the metallic taste of smoke. Marines sat on stretchers, faces pale, eyes hollow with disbelief, some clinging to helmets, others staring blankly at the ground, still trying to process what survival meant. Erin stood a few steps away, hands braced on her knees as she caught her breath. The rising sun painted her flight suit in streaks of gold and ash. Her shoulder ached where the blood had soaked through the bandage, but she barely felt it. All she saw were the men, alive, every one of them, standing under open sky instead of lying silent in the dirt. A young Marine, barely old enough to shave, limped toward her. His arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, uniform torn, eyes wide with awe. He stopped in front of her, voice shaking. "Ma'am, why'd you come alone?" Erin looked at him for a long moment, then turned her gaze to the horizon where the sun was breaking over the dunes. The orange glow brushed the smoke rising from her crippled gunship. Her voice came quiet and even, calm as the wind itself. "Because I still had fuel," she said, "and they still had a chance." He didn't answer, just nodded once, slow and reverent. Then he saluted her, not by protocol but by gratitude, before turning toward the medics waiting by the trucks. She remained there for a while, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. The rotors behind her were silent now, the engines cold, but the echo of their roar still lingered like a memory that refused to fade. She reached up, touching the tattoo on her wrist again, and a faint smile crossed her lips. Somewhere deep inside she could almost hear Ryan Nash's Coolmore's voice through the static, soft, steady, teasing. "You did it, Falcon. You brought them home." And, with the dawn climbing higher, the desert glowing gold around her, Erin Locke finally let herself breathe. The narration faded in softly, steady, human, proud. Respect isn't earned by ribbons or rank. It's earned when you fly into the fire for those who can't. The screen faded to black. The sound of distant rotor blades whispered through the wind, a reminder that somewhere, someone like her was still flying. The camera drifted through the hangar, light softening across tools, helmets, and the quiet frame of Falcon, Lavin, resting in silence. Dust floated in the golden glow. On the workbench, her gloves lay folded neatly beside her helmet. The lens drew closer to her hand, resting on the wing. The tattoo visible again. R.N. The initials that told the story behind every flight she ever took. The hum of rotors faded into a slow, heartbeat-like rhythm. Then the voiceover returned. Calm, grounded, spoken from one soldier's soul to another. If you'd salute her too, leave one in the comments. And remember, honor doesn't follow orders. It leads them. The screen went black, leaving only the echo of engines and the silence of respect.